for people joining, so it might be worth starting and people could catch up.
Splendid. Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jim Hunter. I'm the Principal Cultural Heritage Advisor at Highways England. And as I should have switched my phone to silent before I started this presentation. I'm so sorry, but I have done now. Yeah, and as Hannah says in the notes, if everybody could keep their microphones on mute unless we get time for questions at the end. Thanks very much. Right, this is about environmental assessment and in particular cultural heritage, and then at the end we'll also talk about cultural heritage assessment management. In terms of the contents, we're going to have an introduction and something about the design manual for roads and bridges, which will be familiar to some of you if you've heard the other presentations. And then we're going to talk about LA 106 cultural heritage, which is environmental assessment and design standards, the document structure, scope, some terms and definitions, the principles and purpose, and the assessment methodology. And then in LA 116, which is Cultural Heritage Asset Management, we're going to talk about the document structure there, its scope, terms and definitions, principles and purpose, maintenance and methodology. And then I'll finish off with a quick summary, and then we might have some time for some questions as well. At whom is this module aimed? Project managers, the wider project team, including environmental advisors, and obviously design consultants, as said here, included but not limited to environmental coordinators or specialists. And here, of course, we're also talking about historic environment specialists. If any of you are on there, welcome, fellow historic environment specialists, and contractors too. And by completing this module, we hope you'll gain an understanding of LA 106, which is the requirements for assessing and reporting the effects on cultural heritage as part of the environmental assessment process of construction, operation and maintenance projects, and LA 116, cultural heritage asset management, and the requirements to be applied to the identification, recording and management of cultural heritage assets on the strategic road network. In the new design manual for roads and bridges, particular words have particular meanings. Must is where there is a statutory or legislative requirement. So those of you au fait with heritage legislation in the United Kingdom, and these documents are supposed to apply to the whole of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, those of you au fait with heritage legislation will realise that there isn't any heritage legislation that applies to the whole of the United Kingdom unless you count the 1986 Protection of Military Remains Act. And so it's only the European Directive on EIA which has the word must after it. If you see the word must there somewhere else in the document, it's a mistake. Shall is a requirement of the overseeing organisation. In England, that's Highways England. Should is advice expressed as a recommendation. And may is advice expressed as a permissible approach, something you can do, could do. And can, or other present tense verbs, we use them to introduce notes which provide a short clarification of a concept or a statement of fact. GG 101 requires standards to be implemented as soon as they're published, with limited exceptions, including where the contract has reached a stage that would result in significant additional expense or delay. And the options available to project teams include implementing the standards or considering undertaking a sensitivity test to confirm if the new approach to assessment would change the conclusions or sufficiency of the assessment. This is sort of an overview of the environmental assessment and design standards, and the focus of this presentation will be, as you see, those outlined in red, LA 106 and LA 116. but they fit very much within a suite of overall documents, and it's very much part of an overall approach. It's integrated with the other disciplines, or that's what we've tried to do, and it's an attempt to provide a uniform standard whereby significant effects can be compared across disciplines with some confidence. The structure of LA 106, in common with other environmental assessment standards, it adopts the structure set out below to help users understand and navigate documents. A foreword, giving information of the documents which the new document replaces, introduction and background, for the context for consideration of the environmental factor, which is the topic, let's say, abbreviations to assist the reader, particularly, I think, in terms of cultural heritage, the non-technical reader won't necessarily know what HER stands for, Historic Environment Record, by the way. Terms and definitions to support consistent application of the requirements. And then there's a scope, which explains what is covered by the document, principles and purpose, requirements that apply to all stages of assessment, assessment methodology, the stages of assessment, including significance criteria, and then monitoring, the requirements for monitoring of associated mitigation where significant adverse effects are reported. On the whole, that doesn't apply in cultural heritage. So I don't think there's a slide on monitoring in this. It isn't what historic environment professionals mean by monitoring, which is a curator coming along and checking whether you've done the right thing or not. It's monitoring in very much EIA terms, and it's a specific EIA term. LA 106 scope. Environmental assessment is the process by which information is collected, assessed, reported, and used to inform decision-making in accordance with Environmental Impact Assessment Directive and implementing regulations. Environmental assessments must, in line with the EIA directive, identify, describe, and assess the absorption capacity of sites of historical, cultural, or archaeological significance. For the purposes of cultural heritage assessments, landscapes of historical, cultural, or archaeological significance shall be assessed as a cultural heritage resource. And we said that in particular so that it's clear that historic landscapes are something that we want to be assessed as cultural heritage assets, part of the resource. Some terms and definitions. Archaeology, we're defining here as the understanding of the past through the study of material remains and not the remains themselves. So to have an effect on archaeology is the effect on the knowledge, not an effect on the material remains necessarily. Cultural heritage we define as historical monuments, historic groups of buildings and or historic sites. And then the monuments, architectural works, works of monumental sculpture and painting, elements or structures of an archaeological nature, inscriptions, cave dwellings, and combinations of features. Then groups of buildings, groups of separate or connected buildings recognized for their architecture, homogeneity, or their place in the landscape. Sites and material remains resulting from the works of humans or the combined works of nature and humans, and areas including archaeological sites. And other cultural matters are dealt with in LA 108 biodiversity and LA 107 landscape and visual effects, and they'll also be dealt with in the forthcoming population and health chapter. By the stuff in note 4, I mean things like the view of Stonehenge as you come over the hill from the direction of Amesbury, which, whilst not a cultural heritage asset in itself, is clearly something which the public cares about, something that's important to the public. And when we were in consultation with the devolved administrations, another example that was raised by the Welsh Government was a monkey puzzle tree on the Heads of the Valley Road, which is very dear to the hearts of local people and travellers along that road. And so it is certainly a cultural feature, but we don't really think of it as a cultural heritage asset, at least we don't for the purposes of this document. But nevertheless, it's something that should be taken into account in any assessment, and those other documents provide avenues for so doing. The cultural heritage resource is a building, monument, site, place, area or landscape identified as having a degree of significance meriting consideration in planning decisions because of its heritage interest. You'll suspect collusion between me and the authors of the NPPF here. And note 1 is we say that cultural heritage resource can be designated or undesignated, and also point out that roads themselves can be of heritage interest. Setting, again, a certain amount of collusion gone on here. The surroundings in which a cultural heritage resource is experienced, and the extent of it isn't fixed and can change as the resource and its surroundings evolve, and elements of a setting can make a positive or negative contribution to the significance of a resource and can affect the ability to appreciate that significance, or it can be neutral. Principles and purpose. This section re-emphasises the requirements for consultation contained in LA 104. The key requirements here are whether, in terms of LA 106, are where potential transboundary impacts are predicted, relevant planning authorities likely to be concerned by the project shall be consulted. And what we're emphasising from LA 104 is that authorities or organisations, statutory or non-statutory, that have environmental responsibilities or local and regional competencies as defined by the relevant consenting regime should be consulted. And example of those obviously is local planning authorities, and in England, Historic England, other stakeholders such as the National Trust and English Heritage. Scoping. The scoping assessment addresses the following things to gain an understanding of the need to undertake further assessment. Is any designated or other cultural heritage resource in the footprint of the project or outside that footprint but still potentially physically affected by it? Is the setting of any designated or other cultural heritage resource in the footprint of the project within the zone of visual influence or potentially affected by noise? And is there new land take associated with the project, and could archaeological remains be concealed in the area of the project? If the answer to any of the above is yes, then further assessment needs to be undertaken. In terms of where we say in note 2, the zone of visual influence and being potentially affected by noise, excuse me, there are further documents, there are further assessment documents that deal with what zone of visual influence is and how noise can be assessed, and whether and it should be to the landscape experts and the noise experts that one turns to see whether whether there is likely to be effects on any heritage asset from the project. So it'll be an integrated assessment that you undertake. The study area. The assessment shall define a studied area according to the sensitivity of the receiving environment and the potential impacts of the project. In terms of what we mean by that, there are some projects, smart motorways, for example, where the likelihood of there having an effect on the cultural heritage resource is pretty limited. You know, what could happen? Gantries could go up and affect the setting of listed buildings, maybe. Somebody could put a gantry. There could be nowhere that you can put a gantry except in a scheduled ancient monument, which is bang next to a motorway. I mean, it might happen. One would hope that it wouldn't, but it might happen. But on the whole, the receiving environment is going to be pretty limited there. On the other hand, you've got something like the Stonehenge bypass, where the study area is really huge. You have to take account of the whole of the World Heritage Site, because anything you do in the World Heritage Site might have a direct or indirect effect on anything else in the World Heritage Site. So that's what I mean by defining study area according to the sensitivity of the receiving environment. Where a new road is proposed, the study area shall include the footprint of the project, plus any land outside the footprint, which includes any heritage assets which would also be physically affected. And the study area should include the settings of any designated or other cultural heritage resource in the footprint of the project, or within the zone of visual influence, or potentially affected by noise. And the study area used in the assessment shall be agreed with the overseeing organisation. There, again, I think we're talking in terms of zone of visual influence and the potential effects of noise, about the things that I mentioned earlier, and the agreeing the study area with the overseeing organisation. Is really a matter to make sure that we're doing the assurance that we need to make sure that we're happy with how things are going forward. But I should say actually that those of you who don't, oh dear. Right, when I press back, it doesn't go back, so I'll do that, and there, yeah. That's Maiden Castle, for those of you who don't recognise it, and the strategic road network runs along, I think that's it there, in the form of the A31. So that's an example of where setting and the strategic road network are things that need to be considered. And here, this picture here is of an excavated area on the A14. For those of you who aren't historic environment professionals, these dark areas here, these things, they're archaeology on the whole. Actually, that's probably a comparative modern field boundary, but in fact, these things are all archaeological features, and that's what cost a huge amount of money on the A14, £46 million. The baseline scenario, the baseline shall define the existing designated and undesignated cultural heritage resource. Where desk-based studies suggest that available information is inadequate for the purpose of the assessment, field surveys shall be undertaken to enhance the data. And having the A14 here is a very pointed reminder of what happens if we don't do enough field evaluation up front to inform the written scheme of investigation, which we will undertake as a requirement of the development consent order. And I'll be saying a little bit more about that later on. In addition to national registers and the local cultural heritage records, historic maps and aerial photographs, relevant books, journals, previous reports, LiDAR and geotechnical data may be consulted. So anything that might be relevant, anything that might add to that baseline scenario and help you make a proper assessment is important there. In terms of the significance criteria, LA 104 provides the structure and criteria for assigning value or sensitivity, and magnitude of impact and significance of effect and reporting. So when we're talking about we use the table from LA 104 when we're assigning that value. So very high would really be World Heritage sites or other sites of acknowledged international importance. High is listed building of all grades, and that's a change. Listed buildings are all nationally important, and therefore they are all of high value. That's a change from the old DMRB, where we said that grade 2 listed buildings all across the United Kingdom, the lowest grade of listed building would be of medium value or sensitivity. That's no longer the case. They're all of high value, and that's to align more closely with LA 104 and what other disciplines do. However, more on that later. When we come to medium, we're talking about regionally important archaeological sites or conservation areas, and with low, we're talking something like a fine spot on the HGR and something that's negligible. Well, it's something negligible, a modern drain, something like that. Where a cultural heritage resource falls in a different value sensitivity category to that required by its designation and LA 104, the approval of the overseeing organisation shall be sought. But what we're doing here really is encouraging you to use your common sense. For example, as I say here, a milestone in the lowest listed building category in England, the grade 2 listed milestone, which has already been moved twice, it would probably be of medium rather than high value, because you wouldn't want that to lead through by applying the methodology to there being a moderate adverse significance of effect because you were going to move it for a third time. Similarly, to look at it the other way, a scheduled Roman town, which has previously been a candidate for a World Heritage Site, but has not been held to meet the value of the inscription criteria, could still be a very high value, and you'd want to treat it as such if you might be affecting its setting. You want to be very careful about that indeed. The picture just over here to the right is, as some of you may recognise, that's the grade 2 listed signal box at New Street Station. It's my favourite listed building in Birmingham. A wonderful example of brutalist architecture, I think. And of course, if you wanted to put a bit more railway next to that, and they've been doing just that at New Street Station, that you wouldn't say that was going to be a moderate adverse significance of effect. And in assigning significance, the effect of the cultural heritage resource, when the effect on the cultural heritage resource is not significant, and the impact doesn't substantially diminish the heritage interest of the cultural heritage resource, well, don't say that it is significant. Don't say that it's moderate, adverse, or greater, because it won't be. Design and mitigation. Cultural heritage design objectives ensure that the mitigation is closely linked to regional research objectives, key to the project design. That's absolutely key to the project design. It's important that, having done the field evaluation work and worked out what archaeological remains and what historic building, historic landscape remains are there, that we link any work that we do right back to regional research aims, regional research objectives, and make sure that we answer significant questions, not just take a blanket approach to particularly to archaeological excavation. And we don't end up with open-ended commitments. That leads to an A14 type situation. Mitigation measures shall be identified where remediation of a likely significant effect is necessary, as it cannot be avoided, prevented or reduced in accordance with the requirements of LA 104. Programmes of investigation should be undertaken to mitigate the impact on cultural heritage resource where it cannot be avoided. Programmes of investigation deliver mitigation by addressing the adverse effect of a project on archaeology, even where the cultural heritage resource is destroyed or altered. And that is to say that leaving it unexcavated and unrecorded would be the worst option. Moving on to LA 116, which is Cultural Heritage Asset Management. The scope says what the document's for, principles and purpose, why we need to do it and how, and the maintenance methodology takes the baseline information, proposals for action, implementing action, monitoring and review. The requirements in this document shall be applied to the identification, recording and management of cultural heritage assets, and operational areas of Highways England need to apply the requirements of this document as part of the maintenance and management of the highway estate. That's something that hasn't necessarily been undertaken as much as it should have been in the past, but it is now here as a requirement, and DMRB and all operational areas should certainly be doing it. The maintenance and management of the highway estate shall preserve and enhance cultural heritage assets by reviewing the baseline information and confirming the significance and condition of heritage assets, preparing proposals for action, implementing those actions, and then monitoring and reviewing the implementation of those actions. In terms of what that baseline information is, there's cultural heritage assets shall be inspected to confirm their significance and condition and create a baseline report in accordance with the requirements of the overseeing organisation. And principles for action: cultural heritage assets shall be subject to a planned programme of repairs and maintenance, and reports should identify and prioritise maintenance and management requirements. Implementing actions: the preservation and enhancement of cultural heritage assets shall be undertaken as part of the planned programme of repairs and maintenance, and monitoring and review. Cultural heritage asset management actions shall be recorded and their effectiveness evaluated so as to enable the overseeing organisation to report to government. And that's important for us in terms of the protocol for the care of the government's historic estate, and also the forthcoming heritage metric, where we'll try and show what the effect has been of our management on all the heritage assets within our care, and that monitoring and review should inform future management actions. So to summarise then, what I've tried to do in LA 106 is set out how we expect cultural heritage to be assessed within the context of an environmental impact assessment as an integrated piece of work with the noise and landscape specialists so that it provides an assessment which can be easily compared with the other topic areas and helps decision makers consider what really are significant effects. And LA 116 will provide a framework for the preservation and enhancement of the heritage assets within our care. I should also say that we haven't covered it here, but there is a national administration appendix for England about cultural heritage asset management plans. Okay, we have, that's the end of my presentation, and there is time for questions, so I'll look through and see what people have said. There's a comment here from Stuart Wilson. For clarity, you can find LA 112, Population and Human Health, on the Standards Highways website, and this considers community resources in the manner that I've described. Paul Tomlinson has asked, should the acoustic impact be limited to the surface heritage? Should noise be scoped out of our archaeological features or mileposts, for example? The issue is not acoustic, but opinion on heritage impact. Well, of course, that's quite right, Paul. However, it's a matter of how the acoustic impact is affecting setting. So, if you're thinking about your experience of a heritage asset, and that heritage asset is our archaeological remains or earthworks, then an adverse change in noise could affect them adversely. But something like a milepost, which is next to next to a road and has always been next to a road, then certainly you wouldn't take the noise aspect of the effect on its setting as to be something that was an adverse impact. So you're right. It's a matter of opinion on heritage impact. However, the reason I say it's necessary to go and speak to the noise expert is that the noise expert knows whether that change in noise is significant in acoustic terms or not. And if it's not going to be significant in acoustic terms, then I don't think it can be significant in heritage terms. So where you think that noise might have a significant effect, ask the acoustic expert and see whether that change is significant. And if that change is significant, then it might be significant in heritage terms too. Is the point I'm making. I hope that's clear. How does the study area guidance? Hello, did someone come on there?
I think you're fine, Jim. I think you can carry on.
Okay, right. How does the study area guidance, i.e. includes any heritage assets which could be physically active, relate to a study area for informing the archaeological potential? That's from Christina Reed. Christina, if you can unmic, I'm not, and tell me what you.
Apologies. Yeah, it just where it's seems a bit circular in defining a study area based on known impact, when we kind of need to somehow broaden it to understand what potential remains might be there as well. And I wasn't sure if there was any way to provide some guidance on that as well.
Well, I suppose what I'm saying in terms of whether you need to do further assessment is when you're breaking new ground, you need to look and see whether there are any archaeological remains there, and you may need to do further assessment to see whether there is. If the reason why there are no archaeological remains there is simply nobody's looked, then of course you may well need to do some geophysics, some trial trenching, look at the aerial photographs if nobody's looked at them, though you would have thought they would, but if it's permanent pasture, nothing may have shown up ever, even in the dry summers that we've recently had. And so that's the way in. So you'd be defining the study area that way. If you're looking to see whether there's archaeology outside, if you're looking to see whether there are any, you're concerned that there may be potential archaeological remains outside the area that's going to be affected, then if they're unrecorded, then I think we probably have to have a cut-off point at somewhere in concerns about the setting. But in terms of defining a study area for those that are going to be physically affected by the project, then certainly it's right to be suspicious of areas where nothing's been recorded. And what I prefer not to see, however, is the assumption that there might be something there, and therefore we're going to say that there's a potentially significant effect. I think what we need to do is get on and do the field evaluation pre-consent, and we now have the power to do that under Section 53, I think it is, of the 2008 Planning Act. And I think people have used Section 174 of the 2016 Housing and Planning Act, if memory serves, to get on where there's a current application and do that trial trenching, or indeed geophysical survey if landowners are unwilling to let one on. And I think really it's key to doing to making sure that we have a program of mitigation which is properly tied down to doing the evaluation beforehand. There is coming as well, without straying too much into other aspects of Highways England's strategy on the historic environment, there is coming a contract framework, or at least we hope there will be coming a contract framework, which will mean that archaeological field work will be undertaken from a separate funding pot, and that should help with the current situation where environmental coordinators are understandably, environmental coordinators, project managers are understandably reluctant to pay for archaeological field work which they haven't got in their current budget. And so I hope that with the new DMRB, that'll be another prong to attack this particular problem, which I think has plagued us.
Jim, thank you very much for answering these questions during the presentation. I think what it might be it might be easier if I think we take away. There's quite a few more questions have been added since the end of your presentation. So if we could take these away, we could provide a response and send them out to everybody after this meeting. Does that suit you? Yes.
That's fine by me. Yeah.
Okay, that's brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time, and everybody for joining the call. Thanks ever so much for your time. As with all these presentations, and I've said before, we will, once we've found a home for the recordings of these presentations, I'll let you know where that is. We will respond to your messages within the next over the course of this week. So hopefully you should have some feedback in due course. Thank you very much. We have another lunchtime session tomorrow, which is to be presented by Henry Penner for landscape assessment and landscape design. So hopefully those of you who have an interest in that can join us. Okay, thanks ever so much.
Okay, thanks everybody.